Hello and welcome to Lab Cloud Module 2, Lab 2, Creating a Virtual Appliance. In this lab, the objective is to create a virtual machine that we can transport to a different hypervisor, and we're going to pre-configure the operating system. The mission, if you choose to accept it, is to create a virtual appliance, and we're going to use it that later when you take it out of the box, you can have the full configuration. This comes from the textbook, which I know everyone has read from cover to cover. Section 2.5 talks about virtualization and containers. Lab resources. What do we need for this lab? You need VirtualBox, which I have here on the right. You also need BG info or background info. It's a sysinternals tool. You also need, excuse me, the Windows Server 2012 Release 2 ISO file that you can download from here. I recommend that you download this from Canvas before you start the lab. Obviously, it'll take some time depending on your internet connection. So it's about a 4.8 gig file, so it can take some time. Download that. And of course, you need the virtual appliance PDF, the lab solution that talks you through this whole lab and gives you a step-by-step guide, which I just turned on here. So here's what you saw here in terms of the lab objective and the mission. It's going to take about 1.5 to 2 hours. I think we're going to get it done in about 40 minutes. Most of the lab is downloading the ISO file and also the installation of the Windows 2012 server. Basic requirements, you just need to know a little bit about Windows operating system and a basic knowledge of the hypervisors. We discussed this in class, but also, excuse me, you can get a lot of this information from the textbook. Okay, so let's get started. So here we are. We're going to go to lab task 1, which is basically page 3. Let's get this here for a little bit more real estate. And I'm actually going to bring in the lab file in a moment. Just bear with me. Okay, so we have the instructions here. So I'm on page 3, lab task 1. We're going to create a Windows Server 2012 Release 2 VM. So I'm back on the VirtualBox side of the house. I click New, and I'm actually going to call this Windows 2012. And you see that VirtualBox automatically picks the version, which is Windows 12. I like when it works automatically. I'm going to click Continue. For this one here, I want about 4 gigs of RAM, so 4096. I click Continue. We're going to create a virtual hard disk. Let me just bring this here so you can see that a little bit better. And we're going to take the VDI. We continue. Dynamically allocated in terms of the size. I don't need a 50 gig. We're just going to drop this down to 30. I have tons of space on this computer, but 30 gigs should be enough. I click Create, and I have my, excuse me, my VM. I also need to get the install disk. So rather than click the gear icon, I'm just going to go right into storage here. Same thing. I'm going to click on Empty, go to the ISO file. I just want to show you where this is. I've done this lab before, so this is going to appear on the recent list. But if I go ahead and choose to create a virtual optical disk, I'm going to add and navigate to my downloads folder where I have the Windows Server file downloaded from Canvas. Again, it's about a 4.5 gig drive, so it's going to take a while depending on your internet connection. I select Choose. I select Choose. I see it set up here. I'm ready to fire it up. I'm going to do one more thing here. Just make sure that my network is connected as a NAT connection. I can click it here, but this time I'm going back to the gear icon. I click on Network. I make sure Adapter 1 is enabled as Network Address Translation. Take a look here. Everything looks fine. I click OK. Now I'm ready to fire up this VM, and I click Start. So while this is running here, I don't need my VirtualBox Manager anymore, so I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to bring the Windows, the VM itself, which is this Windows 12 VM, so that way we can see that a little bit better. Okay, so here we are still on page 3. I have the regular installation going on. I click Next, and I click Install. And while this is going on, I'm going to give myself a little bit more room in terms of real estate. So I'm going to make this icon, the virtual screen, just a tad bit bigger, 125%, so everybody could see that. Okay, great. Now my screen should look very similar to what you see on the side here, which is on page 3. I'm going with the GUI install. So you can do this at a command line. I'm going with the GUI install similar to this. I click on Next. and I'm going to accept the terms. Click next again. And I want to do a custom install of Windows and select the 30 gigs that we selected when we were creating the storage. I'm going to take all of the unallocated space. I click next. And at this point, we're going to copy some files. So this is going to take a little while. Let's go ahead and just take a look, and I'm going to measure this to time and be right back when this is all done. Okay, so that took about 2 minutes or so for the install files to copy. It immediately launched a reboot of the VM, which is perfectly fine. And as you can see that the Windows 12 is rebooting on its own, so I'm going to resize this. And what we should do is that it's going to take us to the settings screen, which is very similar to this on page 4. So I'm just going to allow the VM to do its thing. Okay, so now we're back. So we're on page 4, step 3. The installation process that you see here looks very similar to what we have on my virtual machine, similar to the lab file. I'm going to scroll down to page 5, and at this point, you can't see me on my keyboard, but I'm going to do the keyboard combination of Control-Shift-F3. This is going to make my device boot up into sysprep. So Control-Shift-F3. And now this VM is going to reboot again, but this time, rather than go into the installation process, it's going to go into System Preparation Tool, and it should look like this. Okay, great. So I'm at sysprep. And in sysprep, it looks the same here. So I'm just taking a look to make sure that all of these are sized up properly. We have the reboot option. We're going to let sysprep run in the background. So let's go ahead into page 6. We're going to download BG Info. Now, we did this already. By the way, I can just minimize this if I want to and just get this out of the way, but we're going to leave this here for now. So here's sysprep, and we're going to make sure that on our virtual machine, on our virtual manager, that we have the NAT connectivity. You saw this already, but just to be sure, let's go ahead. I'm going to my VirtualBox manager. We have a number of VMs, so let's just go ahead and do that. So in this case here, I'm just going to bring the VM, the virtual machine manager, back up. I'll go to settings for this VM, go to network, and I want to make sure that NAT is selected. We did this already, but just in case you didn't, you just want to make sure. The reason why we're doing this is I need to go out onto the internet. Now I do not want to be found in terms of discovery, so I'm just going to click no on this one here. So now that I know that the network address translation interface is connected, I'm going into Server Manager on my local machine. I can do it from here, but you can also go to the Windows box, click Server Manager, and that's going to turn on the Server Manager. So we will get an interface that looks very similar to Lab Task 2 here. I'm sorry, page 7, step 2. When I get to the Server Manager dashboard, we're going to disregard some of these alerts here. We're going to local server, as you see here. I'm going to scroll over into the Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration. It is now turned on. I want to turn that off, and I'm going to turn it off for administrators, leave it on for other users. So this is this little dialog box on page 7. I click OK. This is great. And at this point, I can minimize Server Manager. I can let sysprep continue to run in the background. I'm going back to the Start menu, and now I'm going to click on Internet Explorer. Same thing that you see here on page 8, this bottom sign here. When I get to this screen here, we're on page 9. I do not want to use the recommended settings, i.e. Internet Explorer is going to try and protect us by turning on the configuration mode. We just turned that off. I'm going to say OK. And at this point, I'm at Internet Explorer, and it should look similar to this here. I'm going to give myself a little bit of more real estate. Now I'm looking for background info. So I'm just going to type in BG info, because that's a particular term. And it's going to take me to background info, Windows sysinternals. And it looks like this URL here. So same URL. If you want to, you can type it into the URL locator here. Or I can just go ahead and click on BG Info, and my screen will look very similar to page 10. And I'm actually going to download BG Info. I'm going to disregard the download Microsoft Edge for the moment. And actually, I don't want to show this message again either for IE. I'm going to download BG Info. And same thing on page 10, it says save. So this is going to automatically save into my downloads folder. I'm going to take a quick peek here, and I see that it is. I'm going to just close this. And I'm going to minimize, excuse me, IE. Now let's go to the downloads folder, as you can see here. And in downloads folder, I should have the BG Info. I'm going to extract that. So I double click on it, and I want to run BG Info. I'm going to actually extract the file here. But one key thing, before I do that, let's back up. Let's go to downloads folder, and this is important for the lab. It says move the files from the downloads folder to the C drive. So right now, this PC downloads. I'm going to take all of it and move it over to my C drive. So let's just do this here. Let's go to downloads, just so you can see this here, this PC, BG Info. I'm going to move it over to the C drive, and I'm putting it at the root. So that way it's at the root of the C drive, so local C drive. And at this point, I'm going to run the tool. BG Info, I'm going to extract all. I'm going to extract it at the root. And I'm pretty good here. So now I know I have BG Info, and I'm going to run it. So it looks very similar to what you see when you run any application. I click run. I have the same license agreement that you see on page 11 here. I click agree. And background info is going to do what you assume, which is it's going to give me the boot time, CPU, and all of this internal information, and it's going to put it on my background. So I'm going to click OK here. Let's just run it again just to make sure. Cancel. I'm going to minimize this here. Okay, so I have sysprep running here. I see I have BG Info running in the background. So I'm going to scroll down into page 12. Where we see the BG Info that's running. Now I'm going back to the system preparation tool, and we have a couple of things to do. So first thing is system cleanup action. We have the out-of-box experience. That's great. We want to make sure generalized is selected, and we also want to change reboot to shutdown. And at this point, we can go ahead and actually click OK on sysprep. And it's going to do what we think it is that it's going to actually shut down the server and come back and boot up in the process. But for the time being, we're making sure that this is shutting down, and then we'll go back to our virtual manager shortly. Okay, so that took about 20 seconds or so. We're back at our virtual manager, and if you see here, the Windows 2012 server has been powered off. So what we want to do now is extract that as a virtual appliance. So we're going to right click and we're going to select export to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And you see this dialog box here on page 13. We're going to go with format 2.0, and I'm going to save that into my documents folder, Windows 2012 OVA. And I want to write the manifest file just like a shipping document. I click OK. We see that we have some information. I could actually click in here and put in some other information if we wanted to, but for the most part, we're going to accept the defaults. And I'm going to go ahead and click export. And it says one already exists because I created this lab already, but let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to write it out so we can get a sense of how long it takes. And it's going to write out to that file, and you should get this screen while that's going on. It says 5 minutes, so we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Okay, so that took about 10 minutes on my computer. It may be different for yours. But just to show this, I'm at page 14, step 11. I'm going to import the OVA file, but before I do that, I just want to show you, I'm going to actually remove this and delete all files so that way we have no instance of a 2012 server. And in the import option here, I'm going to, excuse me, go into my file manager here, the VirtualBox file manager. I'm going to File. I'm going to import an appliance, and it's coming from the local file system. And the file is going to be the OVA file that I just extracted. It says today. It's about a 4.74 gigabyte file. I click OK, click Continue, and it has all the settings that we did when we created the virtual machine. I'm going to import this, and this should take, it says a couple of seconds here. I'll come back and give you a good estimate. It should be only a few minutes. So that took about 2 minutes or so. So now I have my Windows 2012. I'm going to start it. As it says, test that VM. That's going to launch the VM. I'm going to close my VirtualBox Manager. I'm going to expand the virtual machine, which is the Windows 2012 virtual machine. And let's give that a moment. Okay, so we're done rebooting. We're back at the settings. Our screen should look very similar to what you see here on step 12 of page 14. And we're having the out-of-box experience. So back in the day, as you know, when we bought software, we really had it in a box. And we would actually just open the box, and this is what it would look like when you installed. So I click Next to finish the install. And I'm going to accept all the defaults. The password is going to be our default university password. I finished that, finalize the settings, and it says Control-Alt to sign in. At this point here, I'm going to go to my input keyboard, and I'm going to issue the Control-Alt-Delete command. I'm going to put in that password we just created. And it should be logging me in. And at that point, I don't want to be discovered. And the thing that we want to make sure here is that let's see if we go through the basic setup, which we did. We're going to go to the C drive and see if the BG info is in there. I go here, and sure enough, the BG info is right where we left it. So if you go to page 15, this PC, this was the zip file, the compressed file. If I go into BG info, I see that we have that file located there, and I've just created an out-of-box experience with a virtual appliance and OVA, and now we can transport that OVA to different hypervisors. And that concludes this lab. I hope you found it useful.